Welcome to Hayes Elementary. Dr. Lewis, thank you and the district for having us. Principal Iverson, joined today by Rep. Cagle, a champion for our children in schools, by First Lady, a longtime educator, and then of course by Commissioner Jett. And it's, if you just saw in a classroom surrounded by second graders eager to learn, surrounded by professionals who have dedicated their life and their education to being there for our children, and to also understanding the science of learning, being able to have the background necessary to deliver in a way that gets to all students. And our core mission, as we talk about in schools, is to make sure that every child gets the opportunity to learn. It's in our Constitution in Minnesota. It actually goes back to the founding of this country. One of the great achievements we've had is public schools and the ability to recognize not one size fits all for students, and to differentiate on their education makes a huge difference. And that is done in partnership. It is done in partnership with parents, it's done in partnership with local districts, it's done in partnership with the state, and it's done in partnership with our federal partners. But what we're seeing right now is that there's not a desire at the federal level to adhere to both those values and the commitment to getting it done. A budget, as I've always said, is a fiscal document, but is a moral document. And to be able to deliver on these services, the Department of Education is filled with experts who have the ability to be able to target what we need to do and what we've learned over the years to deliver higher quality education. And I'm just going to say, and for the educators in this room, I think they can really feel this. I think for parents, as we see this, the care that goes into this, the differentiated care, if our children have IEPs and how they're delivered and that care that goes into it. The Secretary of Education, Secretary McMahon, was asked yesterday about these cuts and the impact it would have on IDEA and the impact of students. And she replied she didn't know what that was. And if you hear jaws dropping across this for educators, this is the most basic principle of equity and delivering for students in the Individuals with Disability and Education Act. It's been around for 35 years. For those of us in educators, it's the air that we breathe. It goes on and piggybacks to the American with Disabilities Act, but more importantly than that, it allows our children to be the best they can possibly be. It allows the resources and the targeted resources to be in schools. And the Secretary went on to say that they have let go 1,300 of those professionals, people who have spent their lives doing this. We understand this administration does not care about immunologists, does not care about science, does not care about facts, but they're showing this, and she said she fired the worst and kept the best. And she also then went on to say she's been on the job a week. She's either the most efficient person that has ever lived on this planet, or she's not telling you the truth of what they did. They randomly cut experts that are impacting our students and will have a negative impact. So we're here today to make sure that we're lifting up the work that our schools do, the work that they do in partnership with parents, the impact that the move that's being made will have, the detrimental impact on children, individual children that it will have, but it will undermine our ability both from innovation in this country to economics by undermining the very principle that set America apart from the rest of the world, the idea of an equal education and a quality education for all children. So absolutely unnecessary, again, just like the chaos caused by the tariffs. I guarantee you there weren't a lot of parents that went into the voting booth and voted to have their schools undermined, to have the $1.4 billion be at risk. The nearly 860,000 students in Minnesota that are impacted by this, 2,500 schools, and that was not thought out, the chaos that will go through this. But then I heard, and I know we'll hear them push back, well, we're going to do competitive grants. Who's going to administer those? You fired everybody. Who's going to hand them out? We know they're going to do competitive grants. It'll be a litmus test. If you agree with them, they'll give you the money. And we've seen how this works with states. Ruby Bridges wouldn't have needed a police escort to go to school if we would have had the federal government and the Civil Rights Unit at the Department of Education in place. That's one of the reasons we have it, so that that doesn't happen, that every child has access. So here in Minnesota, we will defend every child. We will defend our schools. We will continue to make this the best state for children to grow up in. And we will push back where we can in courts with the attorney generals and with our friends where they violate federal law. And we will continue to do what we can to make sure schools in that classroom right in there, you saw bright, eager faces having the resources to be able to do what these educators do best, give every child an opportunity. With that, I'm going to turn it over to someone who's spent decades working on this, who in the classroom as a principal at all levels, and now Commissioner of Education in the state of Minnesota, Willie Jett.
So first and foremost, I'd like to say thank you, Governor, and good morning. I want to thank Principal Iverson and Superintendent Lewis for hosting us today and for everything that you do for children. And what I really want to say is, for all the staff across the state of Minnesota, and especially here at Hayes Elementary, thank you for providing that umbrella, keeping students and staff out of the storm that we're experiencing today. So, as a former teacher and a principal and a superintendent, I understand the concerns, justifiably, I might add, that families and educators have about the mass layoffs at the U.S. Department of Education, and reports indicating plans to abruptly dissolve the agency. The federal government has invested in essential education services for years, funding that directly supports students with disabilities, early learning programs, career and technical education, and additional resources for multilingual learners and students from low-income backgrounds. These funds don't just support schools, they ensure stability for our students, for our families, and for our communities. The Minnesota Department of Education disperses these funds to directly support our schools. Our partnership with the U.S. Department of Education, it's critical. This isn't just about politics. This is about making sure that students get the education that they so rightly deserve. We at the Department of Education have formally requested clarity from the federal administration about how these investments will be transitioned if the U.S. Department of Education is dissolved. So far, we have received no answers. Let me be clear, uncertainty is not a strategy. Disrupting the foundation of our schools without a clear plan puts students, teachers, and communities at risk. But while federal actions remain unclear, here in the state of Minnesota, our commitment is not. The Minnesota Department of Education, we're still here, and we're not going anywhere. We will continue to fight for the resources, the stability, and policies that our schools, families, students, and communities need. We will affirm quality public and tribal education as a cornerstone of our economy and democracy. And we will continue to do everything in our power to ensure every student, regardless of their background or their circumstances, has access to the world-class education that they deserve. Thank you, and with that, Superintendent Lewis.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Jett. It's an absolute honor to be hosting today with Governor and First Lady and Commissioner Jett. I'm sad that I have somber news for you today. I'm going to share with you what Governor and Commissioner have shared, what the real numbers are and the impact in Fridley Public Schools. Fridley Public Schools is a diverse and vibrant district. Nearly 80% of our students are students of color, and nearly 80% of our students meet the poverty guidelines. So we're a very diverse district. Our students are bright, capable, and full of promise, but they also face unique challenges that require targeted and strategic support. Federal funding plays a critical role in ensuring we meet the needs of all of our learners and provide them with opportunities to succeed. The past 2 days, members of the school board and myself have been down meeting with our state elected representatives, talking about all the needs, where we can really look at state funding. Today, these numbers are strictly federal. I've been in education for over 25 years. I did not dream that I would have to be here to defend the work that we do every day and to ensure that the federal dollars get delivered. Each year, we receive $746,856 in federal title funds. I'm going to pause on that, nearly $800,000. The largest portion, over $576,000, is in Title I dollars. This directly supports our students who are not yet performing at grade level in reading and math. These funds employ reading specialists and math interventionists. Our teachers in these positions use research-based methods to ensure that our students get the support that they need. What we really want to do in education is stop that gap from happening and mitigate it when it's there as soon as possible. So that's why you see these resources and supports start right away in early childhood, and they're heavily concentrated in our elementaries. We also invest in our educators. Like every profession, we need to have professional learning that helps us to continue to get those best practices at the application level in our classrooms. $82,000 is our investment from the federal government and Title II funds. This provides our teachers the supports that they need. I'm going to move on to Title III funding. This funding is over $63,000, and that supports our multilingual learners, our students who are here who have their native language that's not English. They deserve these resources. We need to provide these supports for our students. The next number is going to take your breath away. I'm talking solely about state or federal special ed dollars, as the governor talked about. In Fridley, special education dollars coming into us, $1,320,962. Going to just pause there as you think about that. This is the amount of money that comes in to support our students who receive individualized support. It's the right thing to do, and it's also required by law. We also, as our representatives here today know, we also have heavy support from the state on that, but it's still not enough money. So taking away the federal dollars still leaves Fridley. If we had the federal and the state, we're still subsidizing special education at $2.6 million in our district. Federal Perkins dollars. That's funding that directly helps us to prepare our students for the future. These dollars have allowed us to build career pathways in critical fields like healthcare. We offer programs right here in Fridley for CNA, emergency medical tech, emergency medical responder, and this is our inaugural year of future educators pathways. These career-focused opportunities open doors for our students, equipping them with the skills, certifications, and pathways into high-demand professions that can provide competitive wages and long-term fiscal stability. Federal funds, as they've been talked about, they're not just federal budget line items. These impact real humans here. These impact the students that you saw. These impact our ability to serve well. They're an integral force in changing the trajectory of our students' lives. Our learners bring complex needs. It is our responsibility, our privilege, and our absolute moral compass to meet the needs where they are and ensure they have every opportunity to succeed. Thank you, Governor Walz, Commissioner Jett, First Lady Walz, for being here. I'm just sorry it's under these circumstances.
Look, thank you, and I think just level set this for everyone out there listening or reading the stories, and for the folks in the room, for the folks running our cameras, for the folks, the journalists that are here, for the folks that do this. The person in charge and who came out and said this in Secretary McMahon, this is the simplest of tasks for your job. You would not have these jobs if you could not replace the batteries on your cameras. Or if you're a mechanic, we're talking about not replacing an engine, putting air in the tire. She did not know the very basics of her job. And the irony of this, of criticizing our schools, where she has never spent a minute in there or in public schools, is simply an outrage. We saw it last week when the Secretary of Agriculture told us to raise chickens in our backyard. And yesterday, I sat with this state's leading veterans advocates who now no longer can talk to the director of the Minneapolis VA, an absolute hero who all of us have known for decades, delivering the highest quality of care. We have to request DC to have a meeting with them now and can take up to 6 weeks to talk to that. You tell me how that improves veterans care. You tell me how that brings down the price of eggs, and you tell me what they're doing yesterday and today improves one student's education or saves one damn penny, because what they're trying to do is cut the money to give tax cuts. It's time for us to speak truth to it. These folks don't want to be involved in politics. They want to teach kids. They chose this profession because it's what they love. And now they've been thrown into the middle of this absolutely ridiculous fight. And it will go just as well as the tariffs have gone, just as well as the stock market's going, just as well as egg prices have gone. But this time it's our kids and it's their livelihoods. So we're here to say in Minnesota, enough is enough. We will do everything we can to push back. And I'm grateful. I just got off the phone to the Attorney General doing the work that they can do over there. So we'd be glad to have some questions.
Is that the Minnesota Attorney General?
Yes. Yes.
Can you, the concern with the staffing cuts that we saw today, and there could, it sounds like likely be more, I mean, is that part of the concern is you won't be able to reach people that
Yeah.
you need to, or
Yeah.
what are the impacts
And thank you for the question. You're talking about the staffing cuts. And so our biggest concern is just disruptions, okay? Disruptions in getting answers, disruption in funding. And those disruptions, who is that going to cause pain for? Who is that going to cause the biggest impact, or who's going to have the biggest impact? Is our students, our low-income students, our rural families, our multilingual learners, people that Superintendent Lewis mentioned. And so that's the biggest impact. That's our concern.
The President has indicated that he plans to reallocate duties of the Department of Education to other departments in the federal government. Is that something, Governor, you see as feasible? Do you see a path forward to do that?
Look, let's just name it what it is. The president has no idea how education works. He has no idea how these work. He has no idea how any of this works. Reallocating them to what? You know, these are professionals that understand. These are civil rights attorneys that understand and making sure we're getting it right. These are educational experts that research. When we talk about research, we're not reading Newsmax online. It's peer-reviewed studies to show what brain science looks like and how you get an impact. These people have no idea on this, that this is just a random dude who came in and said, cut money, and this is a place, yeah, you know, it is a place where we spend money because it's our future, and they're just randomly cutting it. So I don't even know how to respond to these now of what they're going to do. I know this is what they're thinking. They're going to say is, oh, we're just going to block grant it. We're going to block grant it to the states or whatever, and then we're going to take off all this. If you got a child like I do that has an IEP, good luck with that, because I know where they're going to be. We can put them somewhere else, or we can train them to do something menial for their lives or whatever. It's absolutely outrageous. It's morally reprehensible what they're going to do, and they're going to put those very students at risk. So no, what are they going to transfer it over to EPA? I don't know what he thinks.
I think the one of the examples I heard was that the Native American education would be transferred to the Department of Interior. What I don't hear in that title of the Department of Interior is education. So if your focus is education, where you should be is the Department of Education, unless your focus isn't education, right?
Which is the point.
Yeah, which is the very point of it. And so now we have things scattershot all over when we had work to do even to become equitable right in the first place. And we were gaining on that, but that takes time and energy and resources and expertise, right? And we've lost a lot of that expertise because of the firings that they made. But that's one example that could give you clarity of transferring it to a different department. That department will not be focused on education.
Yeah.
A lot of Minnesota school districts are worried about their budgets, and about 10% of Minnesota's education funding comes from federal funds. So what can the state do, or what solutions can the state do?
Yeah. No, this is really hard, and I've been saying we'll do all we can, but I think we need to understand states cannot backfill for this, and there's the two areas that are the hardest to do that in. That's health and human services, and that's education. That is very difficult to backfill. Now, what we can do is, and I'm grateful to Representative Cagle, was a leader on this, of making sure that at least our funding formula in the state of Minnesota is tied to inflation, so we don't have to beg just to stay even. And that was a big piece of it. Trying to make sure the cross subsidy, because the federal government, remember, promised us 40% of special education funding. They've never been above 20%. The state of Minnesota picks up and is able to do this, but we don't have the capacity if they follow through with this. And I think it's ludicrous if they think, well, we're not going to cut all the savings we're going to have. We're just going to block grant that and give that to states. You know, that will not happen. And if it does, as the First Lady said, the expertise to be able to put those out. And look, we know it's hard enough with grants. And they talk about going on competitive grants. I can tell you from firsthand knowledge, if you don't have safeguards in place, it can be very difficult to get the right people the grants that need to be there. So if they are truly concerned about fraud, waste, and abuse, you would have increased the grant writers, not decreased them. So it makes no logical sense of where they're going to get to. But the bottom line is this: if we lose any part, if it's the 10% or whatever, very, very difficult to make up the difference, and we in Minnesota are going to have to determine it. And then, look, we all know what happens in this when this happens. If schools end up short, they turn to referendums. And if they're in rich neighborhoods with high property taxes, they pass referendums and they fund the things they need. If they're not, they go without. And then you have an inequitable system, which seems to me is exactly what they're trying to do. So it may be they're accomplishing their goal. So
I just want to mention that we haven't heard any discussion about the federal mandates being changed, right? So schools are still obligated to comply, right, with every single federal mandate with less support, fewer dollars, right? And how you do that, there's not any discussion about that in this rollout, and that will make a huge difference. Plus, in Minnesota, we have federal mandates, but we've also incorporated into state law some of these pieces. So how you unwind some of that is not an easy, nor should it be, because it's about what's best for children. So there are some things, of course, that can be unwound, and maybe that's okay. But most of it is very comprehensively integrated in the workings of schools at the federal, from the federal level, and from the state level. And I've heard no such discussion about that. So what are schools to do with that? No direction there, no conversation there, and for sure not what's best about kids leading the discussion.
Question for Commissioner Jett. I mean, you talked about uncertainty not being a strategy. You talked about disruption without a clear plan. How much of this at this point is still uncertain? I mean, you obviously hear folks up at this podium saying these are bad changes, right? But how much of this is still, we have no clue what's going to happen with these changes, or at least how it will play out?
And so in terms of how it will play out, and I started out by saying uncertain. And when it's uncertain, that schools and districts across the state are looking for stability. They're looking for answers. They're trying to do their budgets. And when you don't have the stability and you don't have those answers, which we do not have when we ask for them on February 5th, when you don't have that, that just puts everybody at peril. That just has everybody on edge. Whether it's teachers in their classroom, whether it's paraprofessionals, whether it's the superintendent, whether it's the principal, the entire school community is just on edge wondering what's next. And the problem with that uncertainty is who will suffer, and it will be kids. And that's the bottom line. It will be kids. The interrupted trying to figure out where the funding source will come from and what department that will be in. That uncertainty is not what's best for kids, and that's what we're pointing out.
That's a great question, because I'll play devil's advocate on this. All this stuff needed to be done. It's going to turn out great. We know it's going to turn out great. Have you heard them talk about what will actually mean for students? What they're saying is, and they're measuring their success by is, there's 1,300 less employees. There is no Department of Education. That's how they're measuring their success. Have they told you that this will translate into more innovation in the states that will lead to higher attainment of reading scores and math scores? And we know that because the data shows us that when you randomly rip an agency out that's been in place for all these decades and you cut funding and throw chaos in, that's exactly what works, especially in the middle of a school year, to work for them. So I hear you on this. Because look, I think we need to do a better job, doing a better job of telling you what is the role of the Department of Education, talking about what you've heard up here, so that the average American says, they hear this, oh, it's fraud, waste, and abuse. They don't need those 1,300 people. It's easy to say you don't need someone when they're fired until you hear the hospital fired the brain surgeon who was there scheduled to operate on you that day, and they're no longer there. Then it becomes very personal. I hear these stories, oh, I knew they were going to get rid of people. I didn't know it was me. Now all of a sudden they're concerned. I'm telling you, as parents, as citizens, this is going to have an impact, and they are basing this on no evidence or no facts that this move will increase student achievement while saving money, while recruiting and raising the morale of teachers and staff across the country. None of those things are happening. All of these things are going the other way. You tell me how cutting the aid to places like St. Thomas or Augsburg that we're actually making progress in recruiting teachers of colors to put black men in front of our students to achieve achievements. They cut all that funding out of some misplaced war on DEI, when the fact of the matter is we need more teachers, and it's really great when a teacher looks like a student in front of them, and we need to get people into this. They cut all that funding, so those are gone now. Those are gone now. So they're telling us that our students are going to get better when all the research shows recruiting and retaining those teachers of color actually improves our students' achievement. That's gone now.
Just question for the superintendent. Can you kind of describe to us what attempting to forecast a budget looks like for you now?
Thank you for that invitation.
Great.
So this really looks like potential looking at layoffs. And as Governor just talked about, when we don't have the certainty of the funding, we can't just magically budget on the same, because we don't know if that funding is coming through. And you heard my numbers. This is not a tiny amount of staffing that we have. Also, Fridley, as you heard when I talked about 80% students living in poverty, we're one of the highest low-income districts in the state. This money, this hits us really hard. It hits all of my colleagues hard, but it hits us really hard. And what we're doing is we're taking funding directly out of the students that need it most. And right now in Minnesota, we're all coming up with innovative ways of getting and keeping the highest quality educators in our district. We're also very committed in Fridley to having teachers of color. Unfortunately, when we look at layoffs, it's last in, first out, right? So our teachers that we have worked so hard to have, Fridley is proud of their international program. These are the folks that we're looking at, and it's uncertain. And then, okay, so sorry, we now have the funding in August. Then how are we supposed to find this? Because other districts will take our amazing talent. We will all take from each other, and it's creating this horrific feeling where instead of our second grade teachers thinking about their lesson planning and all of that, they're thinking about, will I have a job next year? Will my colleagues have a job next year? I'm maybe expecting a baby. Am I going to be able to provide for my baby? These are the actual impacts. I come back to what I said. Let's please not boil this down to government waste, fraud, and abuse and spending and line items. These are human beings serving our future.
And I'm going to add on that one. Keep in mind, when this was announced, and this was the topic of the day, which I would argue is the most significant change that we have seen in this country in a long time, the most potentially damaging impact, the person who put this into motion was opening a Tesla dealership on the White House yard to sell cars for his buddy. We're not in normal times. This is not a debate that this side said this and this side said this and it's equal. They have gutted and destroyed a foundational piece of this country with the stroke of a pen on this, at the same time not even having time to think about it. I would invite President Trump to come here and he and I can read to these second graders together like the First Lady and I did, so that he can actually be in a public school for the first time, to actually see what it's like and talk to the staff who's put their efforts and their education and their expertise into it. It's maddening to me.
Just to that point, you have a unique perspective that no one else in this room, very few people in the country have, which is that you are on this federal ticket. And I'm curious if you'd be willing to speak candidly about what it's like for you personally to watch these changes that were talked about ahead of the election as potential changes now playing out, as someone who was so close to being, part of this.
Yeah, it's a very unsatisfactory I told you so, because there's a responsibility that was my job to get this done, and I've acknowledged that. This isn't, trying to make the case, and I'll try and, are there better ways? I know this as a teacher. When I teach a lesson and a portion of the class doesn't get it, it's not because the portion of the class is somehow less or doesn't understand. It's because I have to change my teaching style on that. And expert teachers in this room knows you deliver one lesson with 4 or 5 different approaches to it to encompass the entire learning styles and the needs of those students. For whatever reason, I did not encompass enough of them to tell you, especially being the first teacher on a national ticket. This was my greatest fear, that if President Trump followed through with what he said, we would be in this place. So yes, it is, I'll bear this, it's on me, but my response to this is, I will fight to the last breath to make this right. I will fight to protect what I can in Minnesota and try and make the case, because I'm telling you, this, again, even if you take the rosiest outlook, they don't know what they're doing here, and they've never given you a goal other than getting rid of the Department of Education, cut federal employees, and save money. That's what they're telling you, which is ludicrous.
To go back to the federal grants piece of this, what's to prevent, say, if special education low-income grants go to the Department of Health and Human Services, they eventually phase those out and quote-unquote no strings attached grants. What's to prevent a state like Minnesota from just reallocating?
Yeah, nothing, and we will, but as we heard this, our federal and our international policy is based on some consistency across states. So if you move from one state to another, you can expect your child to get those equal services. Look, there's states hoping to do this. I saw the governor of Arkansas. We want this. We want to do this. You rank 50th. You rank 50th. And you're going to take that money and give scholarships. I'm done playing nice with the other ones. There's nothing that stops. Minnesota will do what we can do. If they give us every single penny, I trust the experts that are in this room to be able to figure it out. I think it's a big if that they would give us all the money, but we will allocate it in a way like they're doing now, which the experts are doing. I have no faith that states that have moved away from this, that are giving vouchers and not doing anything, cutting services to public schools, will continue on. And for me, that weakens our nation. That weakens us as the 50 United States, and you will once again have the haves and have-nots, which has always been my fear in education. The Minnesota Miracle was predicated on closing the haves and have-nots. We are trying to close that achievement gap, especially with children of color, and this will make it harder, but your question is well put. They give us every penny that they owe us. We'll use it wisely to make a difference.
Governor, in your proposed budget, you proposed eliminating non-public pupil aid with federal uncertainty. Do you still support that? Will that be?
Yes, I'm focusing on public schools, and I'm staying.
Title I money that you mentioned, a lot of that originated from No Child Left Behind, and I wonder, I know we're not operating under that act anymore, but I wonder if cutting that money means children left behind.
100%. Districts like mine, our children are already left behind. We are the ones that change that trajectory, so cutting that money makes our gap huge.
The president cut $1 billion from local food to schools, which is healthy foods into our schools, allowing students to be engaged in it, creating a market for our local folks. $1 billion. That's how they're saving. That's how they're saving their money. That's what they're doing.
Any brief comments just on the House going back to a tie after last night's special election?
Well, again, congratulations to our newest representative. Thanks to the folks out there in Roseville who went out and voted. Now we're exactly where we said we would be. We're at 67, 67. Yeah, we can get to work in a power sharing, because what we've dealt with now is 4 weeks of messaging bills that aren't going anywhere, 4 weeks of distracting, 4 weeks of not getting to this. Again, I kept hearing that Republicans wanted to meet with me more. I said, well, give me some budget numbers. Bring them. And I'll tell you what, there should have been Republican representatives standing up today lamenting what's happening at the education level, but they're not. So I think what I would say about this is good now. We're coming back to the power sharing that we want. We can sit down together. We can get some solutions. Thank you all for coming out today. We appreciate it.